It was an ordinary Friday night. I was lying on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, just killing time until dinner. My wife, Lauren, hasn't come home yet. Earlier, she wrote a message that she would be late at work because she had to finish some urgent matters. Nothing special, lately it has become a regular thing, late evenings have become a routine for her, and I stayed at home alone. However, it hardly bothered me, at least until recently. Today was somehow not in itself. Something inside me began to whisper quietly, telling me that something was wrong. Decided I'd clean up a bit, not that I'm much of a clean freak, but her side of the bathroom always looked like a makeup bomb had gone off. Lotions, mascara, bottles with half liquid, a real little chaos. While cleaning up, a few bottles fell over and that's when I noticed it, a pack of birth control pills hidden behind an old shampoo bottle. I froze, looking at her, as if at something unfamiliar, even alien. The fact is that Lauren stopped taking pills more than 2 years ago. She said she wanted to try natural birth control, and I didn't mind. Is that why it's here now? My heart began to beat faster, and thoughts flashed through my head one after another. Maybe it's just an old package, forgotten and left behind by accident, I tried to reassure myself. But something deep inside already knew the truth. Curiosity won, and I took the package in my hands. As soon as I turned her over, time seemed to stand still. The dates on it were fresh. She has been taking them recently. And at that moment I felt a cold knot tighten inside me. My heart was pounding and I couldn't understand why it was causing me such a reaction. But in the depths of his soul, he had already begun to put together pieces of the puzzle, late evenings at work, her alienation, refusals due to fatigue or stress. I tried to push those thoughts away, convincing myself that it was just a coincidence. But inside I already knew that it was not just a misunderstanding. There were no innocent reasons for hiding birth control pills. And suddenly, like in slow motion, every moment of the last few months that seemed strange began to flash in my memory. I was still holding the pack of pills when I heard the door creak. Lauren returned home. My brain was boiling, but I decided to remain silent. I need to get my act together, understand what's really going on before asking questions. I put the pills back in their place so she wouldn't notice anyone touching them, put a fake smile on my face and went downstairs as if everything was fine. But nothing was normal anymore. Lauren was doing something in the kitchen, humming under her breath as if nothing had happened. What was it? She looked too cheerful, as if she had just returned from a luxurious evening, rather than a hard day at work. I stood in the doorway, trying to look casual, even though everything inside me was clenching with tension. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She didn't even look up, engrossed in chopping vegetables for dinner. "Tiring," she answered, almost automatically. "You know how it happens." "Oh yeah, I know how that goes." For months, I felt like I was in some strange reality where everything seemed wrong, but I couldn't figure out why. My gaze slid over her, studying her every movement. Her phone was on the table, constantly vibrating with notifications, but she didn't even notice it. It was strange, usually she was attached to him as if it were part of her arm. I came closer, as if by accident. "Your phone rang a few times," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Something important?" She glanced briefly at the phone and, shrugging her shoulders, answered with feigned indifference. "Probably something to do with work. I'll look later." Her voice sounded too easy, too detached. She continued to cut the vegetables as if nothing was happening, but the whole scene seemed so artificial that I couldn't stand it anymore. It seemed to me that she was acting, hoping that I would not suspect anything. But I already suspected. And this time he was not going to back down. "And how is the new colleague?" I asked, trying to look casual. "His name is William, right?" Lauren froze for a moment, the knife in her hand clenching a little tighter, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Oh, William?" she asked, returning to cutting. "It's okay, he's still getting used to work. Her response was too quick, too smooth. I moved closer, crossing my arms over my chest. You've been late at work lately. Is it because you help him? Now I was carefully watching her every move, picking up on even the smallest changes in her behavior. Lauren thought for a moment, then started chopping the vegetables again. Yes, something like that. There's a lot of work right now, she replied, repeating a refrain I've heard more than once. I nodded slowly, feeling the frustration building up inside of me. Did she really think I didn't notice? Played on her fake smile and continued as usual. But I wasn't ready to play this game anymore. That I could feel the tension rising inside me, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to rush into accusations until I had more evidence. I needed to understand everything in order not to regret the words I said later. So, I tried to distract myself, grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the kitchen stool, continuing to watch Lauren. She acted as if nothing had changed. Her smile was easy, even a little self-satisfied, like someone who knows for sure that everything is under control. But this false carelessness only annoyed me more. Are you planning anything for tomorrow? I asked, pretending to be interested in her affairs, knowing at the same time that my plans for the next day were completely different. I guess I'll be working late again, she rolled her eyes, as if she was tired of this routine. My plan began to take shape right here and now. Tomorrow I will know the truth. There will be no more guesswork or doubt. I decided that I would follow her. One look at her communication with William will be enough to understand what is really going on. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those birth control pills hidden in the bathroom. She slept peacefully next to her, wrapped in a blanket, as if nothing had happened. But I could no longer see her the same way. Her peace seemed unbearable, too distant and estranged. A giant chasm had formed between us that I could no longer ignore. When I woke up the next morning, Lauren was already up. She moved around the house with strange speed and determination, as if she was in a great hurry. She seemed to want to leave the house as quickly as possible before I could talk to her. I watched her carefully, trying to hide my anxiety. She barely spoke, throwing in a few mundane phrases like, "I'll be right back," before gathering her things and bolting out the door. She didn't even kiss me properly, just a quick, almost mechanical kiss on the cheek before disappearing. I waited 10 minutes until my heart calmed down, then I took my car keys and started to pick her up. It was the first thing I'd ever done in a situation like this. I'd never followed anyone. It was hard to keep my distance so she wouldn't notice me, but I stayed a few cars behind. Lauren wasn't going to work. I knew her office was in a completely different direction, but she turned towards the city, in a completely different area. My heart was beating faster. I could not understand where she was going, but something in her behavior told me that it was not related to work. She parked near one of those trendy cafes where young couples or business partners usually meet for light conversation. But today there was nothing like a working mood here. I parked a little further down the street and watched as Lauren got out of the car. She was dressed not for a normal working day, a tight black skirt, high heels, a shirt that I don't remember. She looked gorgeous and it confused me. But what stunned me the most was the fact that I saw William. He was waiting for her at the entrance of the cafe, smiling as if it was already their usual meeting. She approached him and what happened next destroyed all my hopes. They hugged, but it wasn't just a friendly gesture. It was an intimacy not shared with a colleague. I sat in the car as if petrified, not believing my eyes. Lauren and William disappeared inside the building, and I was left sitting in the car, motionless, trying to digest what had just happened. My worst fears became reality right in front of me and I felt the world around me begin to crumble. But I wasn't going to act impulsively. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos from a distance, not too close to avoid the risk of being seen, but close enough to witness what was happening. Then I decided to wait. I knew they would come out and I would be ready. My heart was beating like a drum as I sat in the car watching the cafe entrance. Time dragged on for an incredibly long time, every minute seemed like an hour. I kept trying to collect my thoughts, but they were scattered in different directions. Lauren, my wife of so many years, is now there with another man. All her refusals, late returns, hiding, all this fell into place. I felt cheated and betrayed, but at the same time, a cold determination welled up inside me. I had to find out more. After about an hour they left. And there they were, Lauren and William, laughing, looking so carefree, as if everything was normal. They hugged with the same intimacy I had seen before. But this time everything became even more obvious. William said something in her ear and she laughed, loud and easy, as if she didn't know that a man who believed in her was beside her. They walked to her car and William leaned closer, touching her hand. Her smile was so natural, so effortless, it took my breath away. This was the moment when all my suspicions became an undeniable reality. I sat in my car, feeling the blood rush to my veins. I didn't have the blind rage you might expect. On the contrary, a kind of cold emptiness came over me. As strange as it may sound, in that moment everything suddenly became too clear, almost crystal clear. I realized that this was no accident. It wasn't just flirting. It was an affair that had been going on for some time. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm down, though it seemed impossible. I snapped a few photos of their conversation and hug, once again making sure I had enough evidence. Then he stepped aside again and sat in the car, waiting for her to drive off. After they said their goodbyes, William started toward his car while Lauren got behind the wheel. I kept my distance again, following her all the way to the house. She drove as if nothing had happened, as usual. But now everything was different. I was different. By the time we got home, I was already sure of my next move. She got out of the car, walking slowly up the steps to the door as if today was just another normal day. I waited a few more minutes for her to go inside and headed for the door myself. It seemed that I would now enter the house not to my wife, but to a completely different person. And, as it turned out, I was not wrong. Opening the door, I saw her in the kitchen. She placed her bag on the table and began sorting through her shopping as if it were her usual routine evening. The smile that played on her face was the same as in those moments when we laughed heartily together, when I thought that we meant the world to each other. "Hello," she threw over her shoulder without even looking back at me. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep my voice even though a storm was already brewing inside me. I quietly closed the door and went into the living room where I left my phone on the table. My every move seemed measured and controlled. When I returned to the kitchen, she was already standing by the stove preparing dinner. Her ease almost drove me crazy. "How was your day?" I asked again, this time watching her every reaction more closely. "Oh, the same mess as always." Her answer was as mundane as always. But nothing was ordinary for me anymore. I moved closer, phone in hand, but she continued to cook, unaware that I already knew. "Lauren," I said quietly. She looked back for a moment, her smile still there, but I saw a slight doubt flicker in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, pretending that everything was fine, even though she was tensing up inside. I came even closer and handed her the phone, which had photos on the screen. A photo of her and William together. Hugs, smiles. All that was needed in order to understand the truth. Her smile slowly faded as she looked at the screen. She froze in place, her face starting to lose color and her lips quivering a little. "What is it?" I asked calmly, although a storm was raging inside me. "What is it, Lauren?" She stood there in silence, trying to say something, but her words seemed to be stuck in her throat. At that moment I knew it was game over. No further explanation is needed. Everything became clear. Lauren froze, silently staring at my phone screen. Her whole body tensed like a spring ready to explode. Her eyes slowly lifted from the photos to my face, and they reflected something I had never seen before: fear. But not the fear that appears when you regret your actions, but the fear of being exposed when you can no longer run away from the truth. "It's not what you think," she finally blurted out, but I didn't even change my expression. Her voice was shaking, and it only confirmed what I already knew. "Not what I think." My voice was quiet, almost calm, but with every word the threat in it grew. "Are you saying that this is all a coincidence? That you accidentally hugged William, laughed with him, dressed for him and not for work? Are you saying I'm misunderstanding the situation where you hide birth control pills in the bathroom?" Lauren swallowed but didn't answer. I could see her desperately trying to come up with something to justify her behavior, but all her attempts seemed meaningless against the background of the reality that had long since destroyed our marriage. "Listen," she began, changing tactics, "it happened recently. I didn't plan. I don't know how it all started." Her words were falling apart as I stood watching her trying to defend herself. But it didn't matter anymore. "Recently?" I interrupted her with a sneer. "It's amazing how you can lie. We've been together for over 10 years and you're standing here telling me it's recent. How long has this been going on, Lauren? How many months, years? And more importantly, how could you peacefully live with me under the same roof and hide all this?" She couldn't answer right away. Her lips quivered and for the first time I saw something like guilt in her eyes, but it was too late. She tried to find words, but I didn't give her time. "You made a choice, Lauren," I said harshly. "You chose him instead of me, our marriage, our life. And now you're standing here trying to make an excuse. But you know what? There are no excuses." Lauren took a step back as if my words hurt her physically. Her face contorted in pain, or maybe shame. But I could no longer understand her emotions. All those years when I believed in her, when I believed in us, now crumbled into small pieces. "It's all because of you," she blurted out suddenly, and her eyes flashed with anger. "You were always busy, you didn't pay attention to me. You've been so distant lately. That's why it happened. William, he just gave me something you couldn't." Her accusations rang out like a gunshot. I stopped, feeling something inside of me crumble. She really tried to make me guilty of her deception. Her words were a knife she stuck right into me. "Is it my fault?" I asked, feeling the anger rising inside me. "Am I to blame for the fact that you betrayed me? That you started lying to my face, saying you were going to work, when you were actually spending time with him?" Lauren was silent again, but her eyes were burning with anger. She hated that I no longer left her room for manipulation. She understood that she had lost control over the situation. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said quietly, feeling devastated. "We can't fix it anymore." I turned and slowly walked towards the door, leaving her behind. Each step gave me a strange sense of liberation, even though the pain of loss was immeasurable. When I left the room, I heard her shout something, but I didn't listen to her anymore. My last wish was to leave it all behind. That I left the room, leaving Lauren standing in the kitchen with all her excuses and accusations. As soon as the door closed behind me, I heard her shout something, but her voice already seemed distant and meaningless to me. I didn't want to listen anymore. Her words no longer meant anything, as did our life together. I sat on the sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling. Every cell in my body screamed in pain, but at the same time I felt a strange emptiness. I knew it was the end, and as much as it hurt, I had already accepted it. The only way out was obvious to me, and with every second that decision became more and more clear. As I sat in silence, I could feel my world crumbling, but at the same time, some part of me was relieved. It was like coming to the surface after being underwater for a long time. All those years of trying to figure out what was wrong with us, all those moments of self-doubt, it all made sense now. And it's not my fault. I heard Lauren walk slowly into the living room. Her steps were quiet, as if she did not know the right way to approach me. A tense silence hung in the air, and I didn't even turn my head to look at her. I knew that her words would not change anything. "Do you seriously think this is the end?" Her voice sounded quiet, almost despairing. "We can fix it. I know I made a mistake, but we had so many years together. Is it all just going to end like that?" I inhaled, trying to control my anger. Her words caused a mixture of indignation and despair in me. How could she even assume it could be fixed? If everything was so simple. "Lauren," I slowly looked up at her, "this is beyond repair. You betrayed me. And it was no accident. You deliberately chose him. And now you stand here and ask, is this the end?" I saw her swallow, her lips trembling. For the first time in all this time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Fear that she will lose everything. But now it was too late. "You don't understand. I just got confused." She tried to justify herself again, but I stopped listening. I was amazed at how far she was willing to go to avoid admitting her true motives. But it didn't matter. "It wasn't an accident, Lauren." I said it so firmly that I surprised myself. "You yourself decided to go this way. And now we both have to live with it." She was silent, lowering her eyes. I could see her trying to think of something to regain control, but it was no longer possible. "I can't take this anymore," I added quietly, realizing that this was the last conversation we would have as husband and wife. "I can't trust you anymore, and I'm not going to pretend I can forgive you." Her face was petrified. She understood that I had made a decision. "You can't just leave," she whispered, but her voice was already weak and powerless. "We can try. We can fix it." "No," I answered sharply. "We won't be able to." Now it was my turn to leave. I got up from the sofa, walked past her and headed for the door. My decision was final and I wasn't going to stay in this lie any longer. I heard her last attempts to stop me, but I didn't turn around. Nothing could hold me back. I opened the door and the cold evening air enveloped me. As I stepped over the threshold, I felt a huge weight fall from my shoulders. The future may have been uncertain, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to live a lie anymore. The door closed quietly behind me and I disappeared into the darkness that I walked down the street, trying not to look back. The cold evening air cut my skin, but I didn't care. Everything that was left behind, our home, our life together, Lauren, seemed foreign and distant. Every step freed me from all that pain, from doubts and betrayals. I didn't know where I was going, but that didn't matter anymore. I was free from this deception, even if that freedom turned into emptiness. Thoughts scattered chaotically in my head. My wife, the woman I lived with for so many years, actually led a double life. Her betrayal was eating away at me like poison, but now that I'm out of that trap, I'm beginning to realize just how far it's gone. My trust was destroyed, and with it everything we had built up over the years. I couldn't go back to who I was before. I decided to call my brother, Ben. He was always there in difficult times, even if we didn't see each other that often. His voice always had a calming effect, and now I really needed some clarity. I pulled out my phone and quickly found his number in my contact list. A few long beeps and finally a familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Hey, what's up?" Ben asked, sensing something was wrong. He could always catch my emotions. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice level, but the pain behind every word prevented me from hiding the truth. "We need to talk." "Dude, are you okay?" His voice strained, and I imagined how he prepared to listen. "What happened? Is this Lauren? Did you have a fight?" I paused for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts before answering. "Yes, Lauren," I replied quietly. She cheated on me." There was silence on the other end of the line. I knew Ben was trying to digest the words, but even to me it still sounded like something unreal. like someone else's story. What do you mean? His voice became even more serious, almost shocked. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure, I said, slowly inhaling the cold air. I found her with another. They were dating behind my back, not sure how long it went on, but long enough to ruin everything. Shit, Ben sighed and I could hear him trying to find the words. I don't even know what to say. How are you doing? No way, I answered honestly. She tried to blame me for everything. She said that I was suspended and that it was my fault. But I can't take it anymore. You did the right thing by leaving, he answered firmly. You cannot stay where you are betrayed. But what now? What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, stopping in the middle of an empty street. I just can't live with this anymore. I'm not sure I can forgive her even if she suddenly wants to fix it. Her betrayal is too great. That's understandable, Ben replied. But you know, whatever you decide, I will be there. You're not alone in this, man. If necessary, come to me. We will find a way to deal with this. His support was what I needed so much. Listening to him made me realize that there is still hope to put my life back together, even if it won't be the same. For now, I just needed time to realize what had happened, and time to learn to trust again. Thanks, Ben, I said quietly, feeling something new rise within me, something akin to determination. I think I will accept your offer. It will be necessary to consider everything and decide what to do next. No problem, brother, he replied. You can always count on me. Hold on. I hung up the phone, taking a deep breath. The decision was made. I was going to leave everything behind and start a new chapter in my life, even if it required a lot of time and effort. I began to move forward again, leaving behind the burden of betrayal and pain, with the hope that somewhere ahead I would find a new path. A path where there will be no room for lies, where I can be myself again. The next morning, when I woke up, the world seemed different. Silence filled the room Lauren and I once shared, but now I felt it was no longer our space. My determination to break this knot of betrayal strengthened. I could no longer stay in this house that reminded me of all that was lost. I replayed the conversation with Ben over and over in my head. His support gave me the confidence I lacked to make the final decision. I decided to call him and tell him that I would come to his place for a few days to sort everything out. Before I could do that, I needed to pack up one more time and finally get out of here. I got out of bed and quickly packed my suitcase with the essentials. Things that only recently had meaning suddenly became mere objects without any emotional connection. Every shirt, every item reminded me of the deception I had been living in lately. As I packed, I was haunted by the thought of how Lauren had so easily thrown away everything we had. I wondered how she was able to hide it for so long. We lived together under one roof, shared one life, and at the same time she was quietly dating another man. Her excuses, her malicious accusations were constantly echoing in her head. Her betrayal seemed so terrible, not only because of the fact of cheating, but also because of the way she tried to shift the responsibility onto me. With a suitcase in hand, I decided to leave home forever. As I passed through the hall, I saw her bag, which she had left last night, on the dresser. She was probably about to leave the house as I was, but she hadn't yet. I stood by the door wondering if I should leave something for her, maybe a note or at least a few words. But no words could explain what I felt. Nothing could justify what happened. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning. The air was fresh and it felt like a new beginning, even if that beginning was painful and unclear. Home, which was once a place of comfort, now became for me just a building from which I wanted to escape as far as possible. I loaded the suitcase into the car and got behind the wheel, but before I started, I froze for a moment. Thoughts ran wildly in my head. All this time I was about to leave, but something inside me still held me on a leash. It wasn't love, it was the deep pain of knowing that something so close and important could be lost so easily. In the end, I decided to call Lauren. I needed to put the finishing touches. I didn't expect her to answer, but it was the only way to end all the unspoken questions, all the painful moments that remained between us. The phone rang for a long time while I sat clutching the steering wheel, but eventually she answered. "Hello," her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't slept all night. "I'm going, Lauren," I said simply, not wanting to waste time. "This is the end." She was silent for a few seconds, and I could only hear her heavy breathing. "Have you decided yet?" she asked, and there was not anger in her voice, but something akin to desperation. "Yes," I answered firmly. "I can't stand it anymore. I don't want to live a lie anymore. You made your choice, and now I made mine. And what now?" Her voice became almost a whisper. "Are you just going to go?" "Yes," I answered calmly. "I'll just go." There was silence on the line and I heard no more words from her. She must have realized that there is no longer any point in trying to change something. I hung up the phone slowly, feeling a sense of finality well up inside me. It was the beginning of a new journey, and although I didn't know what awaited me, I was sure of my decision. The car started moving, and I left the yard. Lauren was no longer a part of my life, and now all I had to do was move forward, leaving behind everything that once mattered. The road I was driving seemed endless. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but just going was liberating. Every kilometer distanced me from the past, from what no longer mattered. I thought about Lauren, about how things turned out. We were once happy, but now it all seemed distant and unreal. But it didn't matter now. I decided. After an hour of driving, I decided to stop to clear my mind. I stopped the car at a small cafe on the side of the road. There was something simple about it that attracted me with its ordinariness. I went inside, got a cup of coffee and sat by the window that looked out onto the freeway. I watched the cars go by and thought about how all these people were living their lives, perhaps unaware of the hardships and pains that befell me. There was no longer any point in dissecting every moment of our past. I knew I wouldn't find the answers. Lauren cheated on me and that fact was enough. However, as strange as it may sound, I began to be interested not so much in her betrayal, but in what made me overlook the obvious for so long. How could I be so blind that I didn't see what was happening right in front of my eyes? I trusted her so much that I didn't allow myself to even suspect something like that. As I pondered, I remembered a conversation I had with Ben a few months ago. Then he asked me a simple question that now seemed prophetic: "Have you ever wondered if Lauren might be lying to you?" I answered him that never. I was confident in our marriage and that we would get through everything together. But now I saw how wrong I was. The coffee I was drinking was already cold, but I continued to sit, absorbed in my thoughts. My decision to leave was the right one, but at the same time I didn't have a clear plan for the future. Where was I supposed to go? What to do next? These questions began to fill my mind, but there was no answer. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I didn't know what to do with my life. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. I looked at the screen and saw it was Ben. I guess he wanted to know how I was doing after our conversation yesterday. I pressed answer, raised the phone to my ear. "How are you, brother?" His familiar voice sounded. "Have you made a decision?" "Yes," I answered shortly. I left. It was a difficult decision, his voice sounded sympathetic. "But you did the right thing. You can't live in a lie. Now we have to move on. What are you planning to do?" I sighed, throwing out of my head all the vague thoughts that had been tormenting me since the morning. "Honestly, I don't know," I answered honestly. "All I know is that I don't want to stay in this state anymore. I need to sort myself out." "That's fine," Ben replied. "Maybe you will come to me. You will have time to think, to rest from all this. You know, I'm always glad to see you." I thought about his proposal. Maybe a little simple life, somewhere away from all this chaos, was just what I needed. Time to think everything over, collect thoughts and decide what to do next. That's probably a good idea, I replied after a short pause. I need some time to recover. Then come to me, said Ben. I will prepare a room for you here. And don't worry, everything will be fine. I ended the conversation feeling relieved. I had a plan, albeit a temporary one. At least I knew where I would be accepted and where I could find some peace. I finished my coffee and went back to the car. It's time to move on, this time to a place where I can finally feel safe, without constant tension and anxiety. My life had changed, but now I was ready to accept those changes and find a new path. I started the engine and started driving to Ben's. My heart was lighter, although I knew that there were still many challenges ahead. But this time I felt I could handle them. It was a long drive to Ben's house, but it helped me get my mind straight. Every kilometer took me away from my old life and brought me closer to the unknown, which at the same time scared me and gave me hope. I couldn't quite tell whether I was feeling relief or pain, but one thing was clear, I was on a different path now. Ben's house stood in a quiet suburb, far from the noise of the city. I have always appreciated this space for its peace and quiet. Ben lived here alone, but the place was filled with warmth and hospitality that he always carried with him. When I drove up to his house, the street was empty. The sky darkened and I felt the first drops of rain on the windshield. Perhaps this is for the best, the rain always washed away what was unnecessary. I shut off the engine and just sat there for a moment, watching the rain begin to pick up. It was like a symbol of my new beginning, water that cleanses old wounds. Then I got out of the car, took my suitcase and went to the door. Ben stood in the doorway as if he knew I had already arrived. He did not ask unnecessary questions, he simply raised his hand in a gesture of greeting. "You're on time," he said as I got closer. "The rain is about to turn into a downpour." "Yes, a bit of luck," I replied, pulling on a weak smile. Conflicting feelings were still raging inside me, but this place was already beginning to bring peace. We entered the house and I immediately felt the tension release a little. Ben was easy to talk to as always. He didn't bring up Lauren again, didn't ask questions. He simply pushed me to a chair by the fireplace, pouring me a cup of hot tea. "You can rest here," he said, placing the cup in front of me. "Take your time with decisions. Just be alone with your thoughts for a while. Time will put everything in its place." I nodded gratefully and we sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain patter on the roof. The silence between us was easy, not forced. Ben was always supportive, even if he didn't say anything. "I don't know what to do next," I finally admitted, staring into the fire. On the one hand, it seems that I did the right thing by leaving. But at the same time it hurts so much. I can't believe it all ended so suddenly. Ben sat quietly without interrupting me. "Lauren cheated, and that's a fact," I continued. But inside I still had the feeling that I had missed something. That I couldn't keep our marriage together. "But we're both responsible for that, aren't we?" Ben leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a serious expression on his face. "Listen, brother, I will not tell you that everything is simple, because it is not true. Marriages break up and it's always hard. But you can't bear all the blame on your shoulders. Cheating is her choice, and you can't control other people's actions, even if it's someone you love. She chose this path, and you made your choice by leaving. You have every right to move on, even if it hurts." His words, although simple, penetrated deeply. I couldn't control what Lauren did. At some point, our paths simply diverged, and no amount of memories could glue that rift together. "Perhaps you're right," I said, looking into the flames, which had already become quieter. "But now everything seems so chaotic. I don't know where to start a new life." Ben smiled, raising the cup to his lips. "Start small," he said. "Give yourself time. It won't be easy, but you will find your way." His words sounded like a true brotherly advisor, and I felt the tension in me begin to dissipate. I may not have known where I was going, but now at least one thing was clear: I had people to support me along the way. I stayed at Ben's house for a few days. We didn't talk much about Lauren or my situation. We spent more time in silent thoughts or doing simple things, going for a walk, cooking dinner together, watching movies. It was something I had been missing for the past few months: simplicity and peace. Every day I felt more distant from what had happened. The pain of loss gradually faded, and a new feeling came in its place: the determination to move on. I knew it would be a tough road, but I was ready to take it. Lauren was no longer a part of my life, and now all that was left for me was to find my new path. One morning, waking up early, I decided it was time to move on. I walked into the kitchen where Ben was already making breakfast. "I think I'll go today," I said, picking up a cup of coffee. "It's time to start a new life." Ben nodded, wordlessly understanding. He did not object or convince me to stay. He knew I was ready. "Well, brother, that's your way," he said, smiling. "And I am sure that you will find your direction. But remember, you can always come back here if necessary." I nodded gratefully, feeling warm in my heart. I didn't know what lay ahead of me, but it didn't scare me anymore. I was ready for anything. After leaving Ben's place, I felt different. All those days I spent in his house helped me to recover from the initial shock, but I had a difficult road ahead of me. But now, sitting behind the wheel and looking at the horizon, I felt ready for the next step. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own life. My new life started with a clean slate. Neither Lauren nor betrayed trust ruled my mind anymore. They were heavy memories that slowly receded into the past, although they left traces behind. But now I could afford to think about the future. During the drive, I decided to stop in a small town where I used to spend summer vacations with my parents. I have always associated this place with something calm and peaceful. It had the same charm that is hard to find in modern cities. I didn't have a specific plan, but it seemed like the perfect place to start over. Maybe here I can find a job or at least a temporary shelter until I figure out what to do next. The road to the town led through small fields and wooded areas. From time to time, farmhouses or old gas stations flickered on the horizon. I stopped at one of these gas stations to drink coffee and rest a bit. The place seemed to have stood still in time, with an old sign, wooden benches in front of the store, and a few old cars in the parking lot. Everything was simple here, and I liked that feeling. The owner of the gas station, an older man with gray hair, stood behind the counter and lazily flipped through a newspaper. He looked up as I walked inside. "Good afternoon," he greeted, looking at me intently. "Driving through?" "Yes," I answered, taking a coffee from the machine. "I'm looking for a place to rest." "Then you're on the right track," he nodded, wiping down the counter. "It's quiet here, but, you know, if you're looking for a job or want to be alone for a while, it's a good place. Few people come here from big cities." His words aroused my curiosity. Maybe this old man was right. I sat at the table and looked out the window at the empty road, thinking about how new places can be the starting point for a new life. "If you need to stay somewhere, I can recommend a small motel on the outskirts," the man suddenly continued, noticing that I was interested in the conversation. "It is not very modern, but clean. The owner is an old friend of mine. There are always rooms there, because most go to big cities." "Thank you," I replied, feeling that this was exactly what I needed right now. A quiet place where you can recharge and gather your thoughts. I took the written address, paid and left the gas station. The rain that started in the morning has now turned into a light mist. I headed for the motel, hoping that this place would help me find my balance and figure out where to go next. The road to the motel was short. The building looked simple, without luxury, an old wooden motel with a few rooms and a small parking lot. I parked the car and went inside. A middle-aged man with thick dark eyebrows stood behind the counter. He immediately looked at me as if he knew why I was here. "Do you need a room?" he asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. "Yes, for a few days," I replied, feeling my voice sound quieter than usual. All I wanted was some rest. "No problem," he said, taking out his room keys. "Breakfast start at 8 o'clock. Room on the second floor, number 5. If you need anything, I'm here, on the spot." I thanked and took the keys. The room was small, but cozy. Old wooden furniture, a small window through which you could see the road and the forest behind the motel. This place was so simple that time seemed to stand still. I sat on the bed, feeling tiredness wash over me. The last few days have been exhausting, emotionally and physically. But now, sitting in this small room, I felt a new sense of peace come over me. Maybe this was just the reboot I so desperately needed. I got up and went to the window. The fog enveloped the road, and it created an atmosphere of mystery. But now it was not a secret of betrayal or deception. It was a mystery of the future, something new that lay ahead. I didn't know exactly what was waiting for me, but for the first time in a long time I felt that it was something good. The first morning at the motel was remarkably quiet. I awoke to the rays of the sun streaming through the small curtains on the window, and for a moment I felt almost at peace. There was no sound around, except for the slight rustle of the trees swaying in the wind outside the window. This place was so far removed from the chaos that was left behind that I felt for a few moments as if none of it had a place in my life. I got up, went out on the balcony, breathing in the cool morning air. The forest spread out in front of me, and it seemed that life here flows in a completely different way, without haste, without worries, without pain. But I knew you couldn't run away from problems, and that I really needed to deal with what happened, not try to hide. After breakfast, I decided to walk through the town, which seemed surprisingly quiet and sparsely populated. The streets were almost empty, here and there only people were walking, busy with their business. Perhaps they did not even know that there were such problems in the world as betrayal, pain and despair. I watched them, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. At one of the crossroads, I noticed a small coffee shop. It was an old place with a sign that was peeling a little, but there was something comforting about this simplicity. I went inside and ordered myself a coffee. This place seemed to hold the calm and reassurance I so desperately needed right now. Sitting at the table by the window, I began to think about the future. I haven't thought about work or life plans for a long time, but now it's time to change that. What will I do next? What to do with all that is left behind? In this process of thinking, my gaze accidentally stopped on a man sitting in the opposite corner of the cafe. He looked somewhat lost in thought, as did I, but something about him caught my attention. His eyes met mine and he gave a small nod that might have meant something akin to a greeting or an acknowledgement that we were both here in our own world, sealed off from outside concerns. Soon this man got up and walked over to my table. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, choosing his words carefully, "but you look like you've got something on your mind." I was surprised by his directness, but at the same time I felt that this might have been a moment when someone simply saw in me something that I could not express myself. "Yes, you can say that it is," I replied, calmly nodding in return. "Sometimes you just have to give yourself time," he said, sitting down across from me. "I myself went through this a few years ago. If you don't mind, I could share my experience." I did not expect this conversation, but I decided to listen to him. Perhaps in his story I will find something useful for me, some clue. "My name is Tom," he introduced himself, holding out his hand. I shook her. "Jack," I answered. Tom looked at me as if he understood more than he spoke, and then began to tell his story. His marriage also ended in betrayal. For a long time, he searched for an answer to the question, why, and what did he do wrong? But later I realized that in some situations there is no answer that would satisfy all questions. "I also decided to leave," he said, calmly recalling the past. Then it seemed like the right decision. Letting go was difficult, but later I realized that it was the only way to my personal peace. His words touched me. They were simple, but resonated in me with deep truth. We continued to talk, and I began to understand that this stranger was sharing with me not only his story, but also the peace he had achieved after everything he had been through. "You know, Jack," Tom said at the end of our conversation, "you don't have to know what to do right away. The main thing is to move forward, even if this movement is slow. Time will put everything in its place. And one day you will see that it was just one stage in your life, and there is much more to come." His words were so apt that I felt as if I had received some important signal. Maybe that's what I was missing, to hear that I don't have to have all the answers right now. After we said our goodbyes, I left the coffee shop with a lighter heart. Life went on and I was part of that movement. Tom was right, you don't have to know everything right away. The main thing is not to stop. I now felt ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. After speaking with Tom, I felt as if I had finally found some sort of reference point. His words continued to echo in my head, you don't have to know what to do right away. The main thing is to move forward. It was a simple but very important truth. All this time I was trying to figure out what to do with all this pain, when really, I just needed to give myself time. I left the coffee shop and decided to walk around the quiet town. Although this place was far removed from my previous life, it increasingly felt like a temporary refuge where I could find answers. Small shops, houses, and cafes preserved an atmosphere that was difficult to describe in words, as if this place existed outside of time and all problems. My heart was heavy with thoughts of Lauren. Even though I made the decision to leave, the pain remained. Sometimes I found myself still thinking about our time together, our plans, the moments that once seemed important. However, all this was already in the past. And the more I let go of these memories, the easier it became for my soul. My life needed a change, but I still wasn't sure where to start. Maybe it's time to think about a new job or at least something temporary to distract yourself. Here in town, there were plenty of places to find something simple, a job that didn't require a lot of effort but helped structure the day. It might give me a little sense of stability that has been so lacking lately. At one point I noticed an advertisement in the window of a small bookstore. It was simple, "We are looking for an assistant. Flexible schedule. Turn inward." And even though I've never worked in a place like this, something made me want to go. It was cozy inside. The smell of old books created an atmosphere that immediately calmed me down. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with a kind expression on her face and glasses on the tip of her nose. She was reading a book, but when she noticed me, she immediately raised her head. "How can I help?" she asked with a slight smile. "I saw the job ad," I said, trying to sound confident even though I was still in chaos inside. "I'm here recently, but maybe I could be useful." "Oh, yes," she nodded, placing the book on the table. "We are looking for someone to help with the layout of the books, taking orders and general order. The work is not difficult, but it requires responsibility and love for books." "Have you worked in such places before?" I thought for a moment. My career has always been connected to other fields, but now it didn't matter. "No, but I'm willing to learn," I said sincerely. The woman looked at me thoughtfully and then nodded. "You know, I see you need a fresh start. And that's not bad. How about giving it a try? If you like it, we can discuss the details." I did not expect such an offer. She seemed too simple, but maybe that was what I needed right now. "Wonderful," I said, feeling a sort of relieved trepidation. "I agree." She smiled and held out her hand to me. "My name is Megan," she said. "Shall we start tomorrow morning? At 9 o'clock. "Jack," I said, shaking her hand. "Thank you for the chance." I left the store feeling like I had made the right move for the first time in a long time. The new job, even if it was simple, gave me something more, an opportunity to recover. And right now it was the most important thing. The next morning I showed up at the store on time. Megan showed me everything I needed to know, and within hours I was part of this little book world. As I arranged the books on the shelf, I felt a calmness slowly creeping inside me. Working with books made it possible to distract from thoughts about the past and focus on simple tasks. Megan was kind and attentive, but did not ask too many questions. She seemed to understand that I needed some space and time to sort out my life. We worked in silence and it was perfect. With each day I spent in this store, I began to feel that I was rebuilding myself. Even though my life wasn't completely put together, I knew I was making the right moves. Lauren was in the past, and now a new page was opening before me. It's been a few weeks since I started working at the bookstore. Time here helped me find balance, although the pain of Lauren's betrayal still lingered somewhere deep inside. I began to understand that my decision to leave was the right one. And yet, the feeling of incompleteness did not give me peace. Lauren and I needed a final conversation, not to rebuild our relationship, but to put an end to our story. One day I decided to call her. It was an unexpected decision, but I knew I had to do it. She answered after a few seconds and I heard the familiar voice that was once closest to me. "Hi, Jack." Her voice was a little nervous, as if she'd been waiting for this call. "How are you?" "Hello, Lauren," I paused, feeling a deep excitement rise within me. "I would like to meet you. We need to talk about all this." Lauren was silent for a few seconds and I heard her sigh on the other end of the line. "Okay," she finally answered. "Let's meet. I think we both need to talk." We agreed to meet in a park not far from where we used to spend evenings together. This meeting was inevitable. I knew we had to deal with everything and put the finishing touches. When I arrived, Lauren was already waiting for me, sitting on a bench under a large tree. She looked tired but still confident, even though I knew our relationship wasn't the same anymore. She looked up when she saw me and our eyes met. I could see mixed feelings in her eyes, sadness, despair, and maybe a little pity. "Hello," I said, sitting down next to her. A tense silence hung between us for a few minutes. "Hello," she answered, running her hair nervously. "I didn't know if you even wanted to talk to me after everything." "I think we should have done this a long time ago," I answered calmly, trying not to let my emotions get the better of me. "I left, and it was the right decision. But we have to finish everything as adults." "Yes," she nodded, looking down. "I didn't know how to talk to you after what happened. Everything was so confusing." The word confused sent a wave of anger through me. How could she call betrayal entanglement? Confused? My voice became colder than I wanted it to be. "You betrayed me. You lied to me for months, dated another man behind my back. How can you call it confused?" She took a deep breath, averting her eyes. I could see she was trying to gather her thoughts, but my words hit her right on target. "I know everything went wrong," she began to defend herself, "but it wasn't just my fault. You were sidelined too, Jack. You immersed yourself in your life, in work, and I began to feel that you no longer noticed me." My hands clenched into fists. I heard it again. She tried to blame me, justifying her deception. "Are you saying that again, Lauren?" I asked, feeling the anger rise inside me. "You made this choice, not me. You betrayed me. And now you're standing here trying to justify it by saying I was too detached. You don't understand." She suddenly blurted out, sharply rising from the bench. Her eyes flashed with anger. "It was not easy for me. I was unhappy and you didn't see it. You didn't even try to understand what was going on." We stood facing each other, and that was the moment when all the accumulated emotions came out. "My patience has run out." Was I unhappy? I repeated, no longer holding back my anger. "What about me, Lauren? I also felt that you were moving away, that something was wrong." But I never thought you could betray me. I didn't want this. She shouted, her voice breaking but the anger still burning in her eyes. It just happened. I wasn't looking for this, but you made it so I needed it. These words were the last straw. She tried to shift the responsibility to me, although I knew that her decision was a conscious one. It was your fault, Lauren, I said softly, looking into her eyes. And I will no longer bear this burden. I made the right decision when I left. And today I understand it better than ever. We have no future. You ruined it. Her look changed. Now she looked truly shocked, as if she realized that all her manipulations were no longer working. It's over, Lauren, I said clearly, almost feeling the words release me from everything that once held me close to her. The decision to divorce was correct. And I don't want to change anything anymore. She said nothing more. She only looked at me, then abruptly turned and walked away. I looked after her, and instead of the pain of loss, I felt only relief. It was the last conversation that showed me everything I needed to understand. Lauren and I had not been together for a long time, even when we lived under the same roof. Now I was free. I slowly walked in the opposite direction, feeling like with each step I was moving away from the past and closer to a new life. This meeting was necessary to finally close a chapter that I had carried inside me for too long. Now I had a future, even if it was starting with a clean slate.